The Square Ball Podcast.
Hello there, welcome to the show. This show is brought to you with Levi Solicitors, who will offer you a 10% discount on your legal fees at levisolicitors.co.uk/the square ball. Met Levi's in London, didn't we?
We did. They were also disappointed.
Yes.
But you won't be disappointed with their service, which is second to none.
It's great, isn't it? They do so many different services. All the services you'd expect from a solicitor's firm.
Mm-hmm.
Wills.
That's one.
Probate.
That's two.
Right, levisolicitors.co.uk/the square ball to avail yourself of the 10% discount on your legal fees. Do we need to say that? Because I'm starting to feel awkward. I know it's fun to leave it hanging, but...
They've stopped doing conveyancing. Is that the message? Is that what they want to promote?
I reckon if you get in touch with them as a special favour to a podcast listener, they might still do it for you.
Let's hope so. Get in touch with them to find out. Dan, Michael, Moscow, as we're back for the summer sessions. Season is over. Didn't go up, as we know. We spoke about it afterwards.
There was an England game, though, wasn't there?
Was there?
Yeah, discovered that halfway through. I was like,
no. Same as you. I had no idea until half-time.
People are tweeting about an England game. Yeah. Okie doke. Yeah. See who's in the team. That's not going to be the team. Never mind. I won't bother watching. But that was fun. Did you watch it?
No.
No, I didn't either. I'll get into it when it starts. This isn't real, is it, this bit? The pre-tournament bit.
No, but we are going to speak on the member show this week about stuff you can do over the summer. Entertaining summers. And
non-football stuff.
Well, I was thinking more just sit and watch football where it doesn't really matter what the outcome is.
Yeah, fair enough.
Something along those lines. But anyway, you know, the world of Leeds United never sleeps, does it? And we got the Red Bull news last week, which we did a show with Phil talking about that. Got the exclusive. That was my exciting Sky Sports style noises.
Yes, we had to keep that secret for about 12 hours.
Yeah.
How exciting.
Yeah. It was wild, wasn't it?
It really was.
Yeah.
Because I was secretly seething and I couldn't say anything about it for ages.
But yeah, so Red Bull, and there was a subsequent Q&A that Phil did with Parag Marathe, and he is basically pouring oil on stormy waters, is it fair to say, with the concerns that have rightly been aired about what it is that Red Bull do. What's your take on it, Moscow?
I was quite surprised, really, when it was announced, because given the level of sort of celebrity investor announcements that we've had, you know, I think, you know, Will Ferrell is in there. Are we supposed to think Paris Hilton might be an investor? She's, you know...
It's her husband, I gather, and his brother.
Right, so that's enough to get her on the video. So we're at that kind of like Hollywood level to then have the next announcement being Rod Hull. I was quite surprised, first of all, that, you know, obviously he passed on a long time ago, so trying to work out how that fits in. I'm assuming it must be...
Emu Peacock Legacy, is it?
Well, yeah, it must be they're rebooting Emu, perhaps Barbie style, and wanting to get the sponsorship in at this point. There must be a film coming out at the end of the year. So,
Rod Hull the movie.
Yeah, but it's so Rod Hull and Emu 2025 is going to be interesting. Not one of the first characters that was brought back, but when you start to think through, you know, you have got the villain story. Grotbags is a...
I mean, you're really leaning into this. You really are leaning into this joke.
And I don't know if it will mean perhaps Grotbags will be battling the Copcat in some way. Well, that, I mean, Emu has to be... Is there going to be a new... Who's playing Emu? So it's all quite...
Our international listeners right now are so confused.
Absolutely baffled.
So confused.
But we do...
And anybody under a certain age, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was... that was my first take on it. And so really been quite confused by what Parag Marathe has said since then. That he seems to be talking about something else entirely. So I've not been paying attention to any of that. I assumed he'd got things wrong. I will say, misunderstood.
Will Ferrell's done some funny films, but are any of them as funny as Rod Hull throwing himself in a freezer, pretending Emu has done it? Because that's a really good clip. Yeah. If anyone needs to, the level of acting in it is.
If you're American here, or you know, from around the world,
if you go to YouTube, Rod Hull freezer, we'll probably find it. It's a great clip.
You can say what you like about Will Ferrell's catchphrases. I'm sure he has some. But if, for example, if you heard a knock at the door now, what would your reaction be?
Rod Hull, pre my youth. Rod Hull, it just cuts off. I think.
So you don't know the song?
No.
There's somebody at the door.
Yeah.
There's somebody at the door.
Ring a bell, actually.
There's somebody at the door. Yeah, there's somebody at the door. It's somebody with a can of Boost.
Right. Yeah. Well, those
It generally
podcasts-
turned out to be grot bags would come in.
Nobody's
and
thinking
people
about
would
those.
boo.
Nobody's thinking about the boost guys, are they?
I'm still loyal to them.
I know you are.
And also,
Is that because they sent a
never,
load of freebies in and supported the charity walk?
well, it's primarily because they've never
Shut down a football
taken
club,
over a
yeah.
football club and stripped it of its identity, which would be my main issue at this moment.
And crowed about it.
But Parag Marathe has said that's not going to happen, and they understand that. And I, for one, believe them.
You wrote about this in the Daily Email, Moscow, didn't you? And it's the old story about the leopard's face-eating party, which was immediately the example I thought of when, I guess the only sort of way you can approach this is thinking, I hope they're different this time.
Let's hope they don't do all the stuff that they've done every other time that they've done everything.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. It will be interesting. I mean, there is genuinely, like, the other side of this coin is that, do you know, it could open the door to opportunity. And I'm absolutely terrified of Red Bull, as I said on the show with Phil, and what they've done in the past and what it could mean for us if they try and do it here. But in terms of like what they do with sports teams, they make them quite good, don't they?
They hire Jesse Marsh. They buy Brendan Aronson. They buy Rasmus Christensen. Buy Max Verber. Put them together. Play counter-pressing, high-energy drunk football.
Maybe they could buy all those players back for loads of money.
I mean, if they move us to the Austrian league, I think we'd probably stand a chance. We'd compete with their other club for the title every year. But I feel like it's a difficult sell to say that their track record in football is now some kind of like brilliant, innovative thing when we've got an example of it in the Premier League with a guy who, you can say Jesse Marsh is an idiot, but he was trained, selected by Gerard Houllier to then work through New York Red Bulls into Salzburg and then given the top job, which within months he then, that fell apart he had various off-field problems there as well. But then the test is like, right, take it into the Premier League and see how it works there. And it was farcical. So it's difficult now to take those things as like, oh no, we'll tap into that knowledge. I don't want any of that knowledge. I'd rather have somebody else's knowledge. Other good football models are available. And I feel like we danced with Red Bull. Southampton as well, they were fine with Ralph Hasenhüttl, who was through the Red Bull system. It kept them ninth for a while and then they got relegated. So that was the thing about the season before last. It was two teams who were doing a strong Red Bull thing in the Premier League, both sinking into the Championship.
I mean, the counter-argument would be that, what Red Bull have done in the territories in which they own teams has been successful. So they will adapt it, presumably. Not that they have taken us over, to be clear. I feel like we've jumped several steps ahead probably in the thinking of it because they've bought a bit and straight away I've gone, fuck, they're going to put some Bulls on the badge, which is probably at least a few years away from happening if it was to happen at all. But, there's a fear of it. But I suppose in terms of saying like, it didn't work in the Premier League, I guess they would try to do some other stuff if it came to that.
I mean, in the immediate here and now, the counter argument to all of it is money, sadly, isn't it? And it runs counter to all the things you hold ideal in this world. When you grow up, you don't want to just be a slave to money. And you see, Man City and their money, and they're annoyed and they're suing the Premier League because they want to spend more money. And it's all quite jading, isn't it? That it comes down to that, but it does, and there is that part of me, and I suppose there's part of a lot of fans that just want to see a successful Leeds, and in much the same way that Newcastle fans have completely turned a blind eye to all that stuff, shall we say?
Worse things, it's worth saying. Yeah,
that people will make those bargains with themselves and say, well, I will welcome it because I just want a good football team.
I think there is probably a bit of a generational split on it. I've noticed younger fans seem more on board with this than people like us who are over 40.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it's because there's a generation that have grown up with playing as Red Bull, whoever, on FIFA or whatever, and see them as just part of the football landscape, whereas we lived to their arrival into it and still see them as quite a new thing. Whereas I have nice nostalgic ideas about Sampdoria because I saw them on Channel 4 when I was like 12. So maybe it is just that we are old, but at the same time, I mean, football is just horribly messy, isn't it? All this Man City stuff that's going on, like there's not there's not an awful lot to cling to at the top level of football, is there? It's all bad. And you either have the choice of edging closer to it, as we're trying to do, or completely stepping back from it. But stepping back from it means probably being shit.
Yeah.
Like forever. Which is a bit of a shame, because I don't know which version I actually prefer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to what we were saying before. I think it was it the show with Phil? I think it was. I can't remember if it was going into the playoff final, but sort of saying that we identify as a legacy club, like we prefer to be untouched by all this stuff. And we kind of wear it as a badge of honour, but it probably does equate to not being able to get anywhere near the top, doesn't it? Just by rejecting all these things. I don't know. It feels like it's one of those kind of, like a Faustian bargain, isn't it? It's a bit of a deal with the devil, if you like.
And the bits you can get sort of on board with, like a shirt sponsorship. If it's just a shirt sponsorship, fine. We have whoever on there. We always have had whoever on there. From an era of...
Are you gonna thirst and long for the days of Esbotop?
Well, exactly. Like, that seems to be basically your other place you go to at the moment. If you're in the Premier League, you get one of those. In the past, we had sponsors. I didn't really know what they did. Still don't really know what Red Kite are. Still don't really know who Enterprise Insurance insured. I just know they were on the shirt for a bit. Thistle Hotels never stayed in one of them. But, it is essentially just a bit of branding, is that? And that is okay. But if it's the Red Bull Arena, if they've got actually all the other Red Bull stadiums have got red seats, maybe we should put the red seats in or do a bit of... But it's where there's a line to draw on it, I suppose. And yeah, the hope is that this time it's different with Red Bull.
But it's dead easy to succeed at this, isn't it, Moscow? Just don't touch the heritage. You can do the other stuff if you want to, and we'll hold our nose to a degree. Just leave that stuff alone. And that's dead easy to do. Just leave it.
And that's the hope, but also the doubt that they've maybe changed. And also that I think the rules in the Premier League make it much more difficult for them to achieve what they set out to do in Germany and in Austria and in other places. But it was striking in Marathe's interview that he said... He doesn't really know the specifics of the relationship between Leipzig and Salzburg. He's not got into that with them. But then he said, but then as part of his reassurance, he's saying that Red Bull, they really deeply understand the legacy and the history of Leeds United Football Club. And actually, that is what worries me, is that yes, Red Bull will and do deeply understand the history and the legacy of Leeds United Football Club. And so they will know where to put the line of like how to manipulate their way in without turning the weens against them. So it's kind of it will be everything else. And so what the concern that I sort of have about them, I think there's two things. A big aspect of them just being here is that because of who they are and what they've done, they introduce kind of a new kind of note of just kind of fear into everything. So it's now you can't trust them. Like, it would be stupid to trust them. People involved can say what they like, but we've got the evidence of everything that they've ever done. It's like, don't trust these people. So that is now, when they talk about, there'll be some activations around Elland Road and like the High Sense style. So they might not rename it, but what's High Sense got? There's a
massive banner on the side of the East Stand, yeah.
Massive photograph of a fridge freezer that has wound me up for years. Now I'd be glad to see it gone. But if that gets replaced by a massive Red Bull logo on the sides of the East Stand, then it's not renaming the stadium, it's not damaging the heritage, it's just an advert, but it's a huge gleaming advert for them that is visible for miles. And so these they can change a lot without touching the badge, without changing the colour of the shirt. It would be a very wise PR move to make sure that their logo on the shirt doesn't have any red on it. Easy win.
But it will.
Well, then I don't understand why they wouldn't take that win, but then maybe I don't understand how they're going to work at all. And I'm sure they would say that. But there's lots of other things they can do. Style of play, what the stadium looks like, what the shirts look like, what the media presentation, the online presentation, all looks like. They can change all of that stuff and then go, but the name is still the same. You're like, well, yeah, but the name is now slapped on something that is basically a Red Bull club in everything except name.
But people will count that and say, but what's the issue with that?
Or what's the alternative, I suppose, is what people will say, because if it's not, this again, we have not been taken over by Red Bull.
However,
we're looking ahead, aren't we, I suppose? But what's the difference, I suppose people would say, between being owned by Red Bull or the 49ers Enterprises or Radrizzani or Ken Bates? There is always a person who is not a Leeds United fan, essentially, owning Leeds United. And they are free to do what they want with it. And I guess if the worst they do is put some adverts up and make us good, is that preferable to selling all our players and making us bad in the way that Bates did?
Or having people executed?
Would be worse.
You don't have to sort of choose between these things. You can just dislike them all.
That is very true.
And enjoy the team winning.
Yeah.
It's very possible. I think that's the thing that always go back to it. Newcastle, you can enjoy your team winning. You don't have to go spend your days on Twitter defending the Saudi regime. You can hate what the Saudi regime does, and you can like your football team. It may be hypocritical, but everything is like there are hard choices everywhere, and it too easily comes down to like just because they buy your club or buy a part of your club that you have to like them, and you don't. I mean, I always go back to there was a traditional model of kind of how you were as a football fan. It maybe is nostalgic, but you would like the players are heroes, the manager is an idiot, and the owners are tight-fisted old bastards. And that's how you would feel about the football club. And it's some kind, I think...
Like the local mill owner or whatever.
Yeah, he was some guy who never buy...
Scrapyard or whatever.
He doesn't know anything, and he's, he's just a malevolent presence who funds the team or doesn't pay enough for the team to be any good. And at some point, this increased tribalism that I think is sort of sold by clubs and that then entities like Red Bull and entities like nation states then use is the idea that everything to do with your football club is something that you should support. And I don't think that's necessarily should be the case. Because it is then essentially your soul and then your time that is up for sale. Because what happens if say Red Bull do take us over and they own us for a year and then we're sold to a nation state and then we're sold to somebody else. I'm like, am I supposed to love every single one of those entities and be take my Red Bull posters down off the wall, remove the flag from outside, right?
Stop pumping my kids full of caffeine and taurine.
Yeah, I'm into this stuff now instead. It's not. It's basically beyond my control, but then also because it's beyond my control, it can be beyond my affections, and it's like they are essentially regard every owner as people who are probably going to ruin the football club unless they do otherwise. And then when they don't, it can be a pleasant surprise. But I don't have to, I don't have to get like a big Parag Marathe flag and wave it around just because he owns us. He's just the guy who runs it, and he better do a good job.
Yeah, you just hope that your goals align, and I suppose that's where the concern comes in with Red Bull. And as you say, the top end of football it's increasingly confusing, isn't it?
It also doesn't matter if the goals align, I would say. If the goals align, great.
Well, I mean,
I also don't care.
No, I mean in the sense that they want a good football team, we want a good football team, and if we can stay on that sort of twin track, then for as long as possible, then fine. You tolerate one another, don't you?
There's still different reasons. So I want a good football team because I can watch a good football team and feel some pride in it, and whoever owns the football club wants a good football team so that the club will be worth more money and they can sell it for more. So even if there is this kind of convergence, it's still in the...
Yeah, you don't have to hold hands while you're doing it.
It's in the grand scheme irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of my concerns as well around, I know a lot of people are saying, they won't allow name changes in English football. The whole Tigers thing was rejected. There's going to be this independent regulator coming in, but then also over the horizon you see the Super League, and that would have been outside of UK jurisdiction because are the UK government going to come in and say, well, if you're playing in a European league at some point, I'm not talking about in the near future, but companies are buying into this with a long-term vision. Americans are investing billions of pounds in companies that essentially still lose loads of money every year, and they're doing it with the eye on one day this is going to be worth loads of money and it will generate money, and we can actually... Which is
what the NFL franchises do, don't
they? Exactly. Yeah. American sports don't lose money like English football does. It's just from Premier League to non-league, fucking everyone loses money more or less. And occasionally you'll have a good year where you'll sell some good players. Like you'll have a Brighton year where they'll sell some players to Chelsea and they'll make a profit. But generally everyone loses money.
So I was going to say, so if you're not doing that, you're trying to tweak the rules to your favour.
Exactly. So like, for example, like lobbying really works. So all of a sudden, if they go, well, it would actually, it's not really viable, isn't this, unless you let us change the name. And there's pressure applied over a number of years, then you go, okay, well, that is allowable. And then you've seen that they're about to, it's on the horizon now that games are going to get played outside of the UK. And that's something that wasn't allowable. But people have deep pockets. You see what Man City are doing now, where they're challenging the Premier League. So there's the potential to get everything tied up in a hugely lengthy and expensive legal process. And who exactly can have jurisdiction over this isn't completely clear.
And it'll end up being the clubs themselves.
So exactly,
You're self-governing, if
it reaches a point where they go, well, actually, it doesn't even matter what FIFA say. This is now a separate thing. You can't stop us playing football. Yeah. There's now a group of 30 clubs who've formed a separate organisation. It's all potentially up for grabs.
Which is basically what the Premier League did.
Exactly.
Like back at the start of the 1990s.
It's full of splits where you get, and within European football, you get like the sort of club associations, don't you? Where there's, I can't remember what they're called now, but there's one that's the wider one, then there's one that's just
like the G20 or whatever.
There's just the very elite clubs who essentially demand that they're in the Champions League every year, which is what the new format more or less does now, because it's based on historical performances and stuff. So those teams are definitely in it, and it's just opening the door to what they actually want, and whether or not there's a long-term plan there to see that Red Bull see themselves as being able to get us in a position to be in that, and then they can do what they want. Who knows? I don't know. I suppose I don't rule anything out with football, because if you'd have said to me when I first went to a game in like the early 90s that, Saudi Arabia would own Newcastle and you would have Newcastle fans out there going, I think it's all right what they're doing. I think they seem like a good bunch of lads. Yeah. It's a completely different world. And I suppose in the grand scheme of the history of Leeds United, if they're seeing another 100 years spreading out in front of them and potential for it to be something completely different, it could be. That we shouldn't be complacent about the fact that it's been here long enough that it will never change.
Shouldn't also be the brake on things that ultimately won't concern us 100 years from now. Like if Leeds are playing on the moon, then there is part of me that is kind of
I'll send my hologram up to watch them, Moscow. Yeah,
that for all my resistance, like I'm sort of fascinated to see how all this kind of moves, what it all becomes. Because I know that's the idea that if Red Bull get too involved, like you'd turn your back, and I suppose there's be a strong argument for it, but I would still be very, very interested in how it goes down and like how badly they either create something wonderful or blow up everything I ever loved. Be interesting to watch. The other thing in a kind of a nearer future thing, because of the football governance bill that protects heritage and says you can't change the badge and you can't change the name. There are caveats in that where it's unless you can prove that the fans want it, which immediately takes me back to when Peter Ridsdale wanted us to move to Stoughton, and no Leeds fan knew any other Leeds fan who wanted that, and then Peter Ridsdale came out with an 87%.
I wanted it.
Did you vote for it?
I believe I did.
You're the one person I've ever met who actually votes for it. Do you believe, though, from the time as somebody who had a vote, that 87% of season ticket holders wanted to move?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I feel like this is where a generational split maybe comes in, because that will have been, I'd have been like 17? Was it about 2000? Something like that?
Yeah, 2001.
So I was young then, and I think I thought, we need to everyone's getting new stadiums.
Yeah.
We need progress. I don't get me wrong, I completely regret that vote, and obviously it never happened, because instead we bought Seth Johnson and Robbie Fowler with that money, which was turned out to be a great way of spending it instead. But yeah, if we were now out by essentially the shit farm over there, it would.
For anybody who doesn't know, there's a sewage works out there. Yeah.
It would have been a bad move, because it's nowhere near the city centre, is it? And where we are now is better in pretty much all respects.
Leaving aside the 17-year-olds, because in the demographic of season ticket holders who were polled, I don't think there was enough. I never knew anybody who supported it, and I remember there was a great deal of shock when Peter Ridsdale managed to come up with an 87% in favour. A more recent one would then be the badge change, when Angus Kinnear and the club were able to push that forward, saying, well, no, we asked 15,000 people about this.
It was only 10, I think. It was only 10,000.
10,000, I apologise. And then you looked at the questions that they had asked those 10,000 people, and they were all, none of them were, do you want to change the badge? It was all like, what's important to you? What do you like about Leeds?
It was what's the biggest symbol, wasn't it?
Yeah, what symbols do you like? Would you, if the badge ever changed, would you like that? And then they put those two things together. It's like, right, they want this badge. So essentially the point is, particularly with if you do lean on a different demographic and different views, it may be easier to get those to say to the football governors or the independent regulator, no, they want this. They do want this. And maybe they can do it genuinely, because I think part of the generational divide now might be less between sort of nostalgia and youth, and more that winning at all costs seems to be a much more prevalent thing, that if you're not top of the Premier League, you are nowhere. And
you're a finished club.
Yeah, and the idea that, it's that a game of football is something that you can just enjoy on its own merits. I know we're guilty of playing into it as well, not guilty, but part of it, of like seeing the longer narratives, and like, so immediately like this whole discussion is about what Leeds United is going to be like in 25 years. A lot of that seems to have grown in the last 25 years to be more of a concern, whereas there was still a strong case to be made for just like, what's bad about going to see a football match, it being good, enjoying it, and then going home, and then that part of things doesn't give you the flex that being top of the Premier League, or even being sponsored by Red Bull, is seen as kind of a status symbol in the greater scheme of things, that, you know, Flamingo Land, with all respect to their rides and birds, doesn't offer to the average.
You couldn't call it a global brand, could you?
No, exactly. But then who gives a fuck? Really? It's only those brands are kind of should only be in my sort of ideal world, would only kind of be of interest in that one. They're not, like, for example, Dortmund dealing with arms manufacturers. Preferably avoid that flavour of sponsor as far as you can, and also, like, have we got some good players as a result of it if they paid some money in? Beyond that, it's like, are they cool? Are they, will they give us? Do we feel like a global? Oh, it's all.
Actually, that sort of tips us back towards where this is heading in the short term, which is to get around financial fair play. You look at it, and that's exactly what it smacks of, doesn't it? Like, big cash injection now means we can keep most of the players that we want to keep, maybe move a couple on. I mean, Gruev as well has been linked with moves away back to Germany, which you could bank a £10 million profit on him. Isn't football glamorous, everybody? FFP and all that. But in the immediate term, it might make for a better season next season, and a more enjoyable one, as a result of this cash injection. Because you're right, Moscow, I've increasingly steered toward the idea of just enjoying days at the football now. And it took me a while to kind of appreciate that, but it's kind of landed with me in the last year or two. And I think a lot of Leeds fans seem to reflect that view as well, that actually the lack of disappointment potentially at not, at missing out against Southampton and not going up, it's not the end of the world, is it? Mm-hmm. It's really tempered my disappointment, because I quite enjoyed winning a lot of games last year. And if we can do that again, I mean, you can't stay here forever. I think it's got a limited shelf life, but it didn't feel like the be all and end all in the same way that, like, getting promoted under Bielsa did, for example. So yeah, I have to, there are limits to my enjoyment of being in the Championship, because being 15th every year and selling everybody is shit. Yeah. But this could give us an opportunity at a nice season this season, potentially. This season coming up, sorry. Yeah, I must admit that has crossed my mind as well. That just, it does mean that some of that immediate dread is maybe not as present. Maybe we could sign Joe Rodon. Did it cross your mind because the chairman said this could be the difference between keeping a player and selling a player? Not that I'm trying to, like, emotionally manipulate anybody into but it's obvious, isn't it? Enjoying this. Money means you get to keep players and buy players. It's kind of spelling out the unsaid truth, isn't it? He's saying it. He's saying the thing that you're not really supposed to say. But I mean, heaven knows I'm not a cynical man. But the other thing is, normally when big business say they won't do something, if you get a feeling sometimes, don't you? Like, I think this is going to mean this.
And someone always comes out to reassure you and goes, we promise you it won't mean that. And then a few years down the line, they go, well, it now has to mean that, unfortunately. Things have changed, and we didn't see this coming, but it turns out it was exactly like you said. Yeah. So I'm always just wary of that, whether or not it's like, I mean, not to get too political, whether or not it's like services being privatised or whatever. There's always bits where you go, I bet this happens. I bet down the line this is going to happen, and then it generally does. The bad things happen.
And that circles back to the problem with Red Bull in the first place. I think people might be like, well, they are not a nation state and they're not an arms manufacturer. What's the problem with a fizzy drinks manufacturer? And the problem is that they have done the same thing every single time up to now. And even the first time when they took over Austria Salzburg, it's funny listening to their or reading what their fans said at the time. They said, we thought this would be great. More money for transfers. They were going to do up the stadium. And they were like, because people would say Austria Salzburg had been Casino Salzburg before. And they were like, yeah, we'd been named after sponsors. It wasn't a big deal. And then within a year, and they were like, and they gave us all these reassurances. And then, within a year, if you were trying to wear the old colours in that stadium, you were basically being barred. They were checking people for purple at the turnstiles and banning people from
like Cellino.
People. Yeah, there were, but less. I could understand it with if Cellino was checking people for purple at the turnstiles because he was mental, superstitious. Whereas this was cynical, where they were like, no, those colours are not relevant to this football club anymore. The only colours that are relevant here are Red Bull colours. And to the extent that if you try to wear the old colours in this ground, we will think you are protesting and we will not let you in. And they were protesting, which is why they wouldn't let them in. So, but the interesting part of that story for us to pay attention to is the start, where even fans who then went and formed the splinter club to keep Austria Salzburg going were saying, this could be great, money for transfers, they're giving us all these reassurances, we're not too worried about the name changing, that's all going to be great. And then within a very short period of time, they were all going, the lack of promotion, and then just the whole thing. This goes back to my great idea that we randomise the leagues.
Yeah. Well, on that, let me cross-sell an upcoming show as well. We're going to speak to Wayne Gamble, who is betting onto us as the Beating Generation, who did a load of covers with us back in the day.
Visit Beeston. Yeah,
the Visit Beeston postcard that we did. And Wayne has closely followed the Austria Salzburg story. So we're going to get him on and do a podcast to just chat about that. And everyone's going to have their own opinion about the Red Bull influence at Leeds, where it could lead and all that. But it will tell the story of Austria Salzburg, and you can make your own mind up about what's happened. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a chance to learn something new, because there's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know about, and you just touched on a lot of it there, Moscow. So look out for that.
And Red Bull is
upcoming show.
It's fair to say as well, Red Bull are a different company. They're under different management than they were at the point of Austria Salzburg, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Mateschitz, who's the guy who was running it, he passed away, didn't he, a couple of years ago, and there have been rumblings about potential policy changes, but I mean, how are we to know if that's true or not?
Yeah, exactly. It's all kind of internal stuff that we cannot see or forecast. So it's one of those ones you go, maybe this time, maybe this dictator's the last one. So one of those ones.
I suppose I'm repeating myself, but they may have a different model. Still don't think that'll be good.
Right, well, we'll wrap it up there for this time, and we'll be back with another weekly roundup next week. We're going to speak to Phil before the week is out as well. Plus, we've got Rob's going to come in as well tomorrow, and we're going to do like an end of season roundup to award our Player of the Year. It's all to play for between Joe Rodon and Chris Clarkson, I suspect.
And Ampadu was in with the show.
Was up there, wasn't he? So if you factor in the playoff final scores out of 10 from our TSB Plus members, who's going to lift the trophy?
Chris Clarkson did not put a foot wrong.
No.
Think of it that way.
Apart from when he was driving that car.
We'll see you soon.
The Square Ball Podcast.